Ready? All right, welcome back to Fabrication 101. On this episode, we're going to take this chunk of old bed frame, which is a good source of angle iron if you're ever looking for cheap angle iron. I don't think it's quite 1/8 inch. It's a little bit thinner, but it's like 1.5 by 1.5 by roughly 1/8 inch angle iron. It works really good for a lot of different projects. I've built quite a bit of stuff out of these things. The other thing I'm going to do is find a way to organize one of my favorite tools, which are vice grips and vice clamps. And yes, I know vice grip is the brand name. In fact, most of these are vice grips with the exception of a couple of them. But I love these tools. They're very useful, very handy, but I would like to have a much better way to organize them. So that's what we're going to get after today. All right, let's see how this works for a voiceover here. So I've got this piece of angle iron. This is an old piece of bed frame, like I said. Here I'm just making sure I have a square end to work off on, because I have used this material before to build a couple of other projects in the past. So use my trusty dusty here bandsaw to make my cuts. I find a lot of times if I set the angle iron in this fashion, it's a lot easier to make a nice clean straight cut across the top with this bandsaw. So I got to mark out my holes. I think my piece ended up being about 31 inches long. So the holes are 2 inches on center, so they're 2 inch spaced apart. Just using my combination here square to mark my depth of the hole. And then I got to mark where the center line of that hole is going to be as well, so that I can get it all marked out and set up for drilling here. My center punch, my spring-loaded center punch that I love, is getting a little wore out, so I went back to the old hammer, and it works pretty well. I don't know what was weird here. Something happened. I pre-drill with 1/4 inch a lot of times. It seems to work really well. And then I switched to 1/2 inch, thinking that kind of jump shouldn't be too much of a problem. Maybe I should have gone 3/8 instead. But I wiped out like 4 or 5 1/2 inch drill bits that should have been just fine drilling through this material. So I don't know if this stuff is, for whatever reason, is extra hard, or maybe I just had a bad batch of drill bits. But I ended up switching over and using the step bit to finish this stuff out. The step bit here, I'm just marking my 1/2 inch depth, so I know where I'm going to, although that eventually ends up burning off while I'm doing this. So I do end up using some, I believe it's just gear oil, some older gear oil or transmission fluid is kind of a cutting oil on this. Helps to keep the step bit a little bit cooler. Generally, I don't like cutting or drilling through much thicker than like 16 gauge material with a step bit. This stuff's about 1/8 of an inch thick, so it's kind of hard on that old step bit. So may be in the market for a new one after this. So if anybody's got a a good suggestion, leave it in the comments below. All right. All right. My second set of holes are done. I really intended to drill those in the drill press, but for some reason, I wiped out like 5 half-inch drill bits trying to do this. I don't know what happened. I couldn't even get one hole done. So that's when I stepped over to the step bit, no pun intended, to finish out these holes. Now the next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and notch them down each side. I'm probably just going to go ahead and use my bandsaw. This is something that you could also do with a cutoff wheel if you wanted to, or even a plasma cutter. But I think my bandsaw is going to be the most efficient and cleanest way to go ahead and do this. Alrighty, all those holes are notched. Now we just got to get it cleaned up and tack her into place, and she'll be all taken care of. Alright, you can see it's all mounted in there. I didn't mount it perfectly flat. I did put a little bit of an angle on it. You can kind of see that, the way it's tacked into there. That way that I don't have to worry about the clamps like swinging their way out. I did only just tack this because there might be a reason in the near future where I want to move this to a different location, maybe even mount it on a wall. And so I didn't want to put it in there permanently. So anyway, let's see what it looks like with all the clamps in there. Yeah, look at that. That came out pretty good. Actually, I'm really pleased with that. Unfortunately, that's not all my clamps, and I know where there's actually a couple more of these guys that are currently in use. So in reality, some of these vice grips don't really need to be out here. I don't use all of these all the time. Probably keep a couple of the straight jaws and a couple of the round jaws, and then the other ones can go in a toolbox. But for the time being, this makes me really happy. That's going to do it on this episode of excuse me, that's going to do it for this episode of Fabrication 101. I hope you guys appreciate this little project. Maybe you want to build something like this yourselves. Really pretty straightforward, not a lot of, really honestly, not a lot of fabrication. A considerable amount of layout work went into this, and taking the time to get the holes laid out and marked and center punched and drilled. All that makes a huge difference when you're trying to build something like this and have it come out even remotely nicely. As I can see, and I said, I do have a few clamps laying around and still out, and I know there's a few more sticking around the shop that are in use right now. So I may end up having to build another one of these or a bigger one at another point, but that'll be on another episode of Fabrication 101. In the meantime, do me a favor, go like, comment, subscribe if you haven't done that already. And as always, do yourself a favor, do me a favor, and go build something.